I never thought I would be sitting here, in this cramped studio apartment that smells like mildew and regret, watching my entire world collapse on a smartphone screen. But here I am. Christopher Morrison, once celebrated chef and restaurant owner, now reduced to scrolling through social media at 3 in the morning, watching the same video clip play over and over again. The clip where Mary, the woman I fired 6 years ago, the cook I humiliated and destroyed in front of my entire kitchen staff, stands on that glittering television stage under those blinding lights, and tells millions of viewers exactly what kind of monster I am. Or was. Or still am. I don't even know anymore. The video has been viewed 47 million times. 47 million people have watched Mary tell her story. 47 million people now know what I did. The comments section is endless, a cascading waterfall of hatred directed at me. They call me every name imaginable. They wish terrible things upon me. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake every single night, is that they're right. Every single one of them is absolutely right about me. Let me start from the beginning, because if I'm going to confess, if I'm going to finally face what I did, I might as well be thorough. What do I have left to lose at this point? My restaurant closed 8 months ago. My wife filed for divorce and took everything. My children, my own flesh and blood, have blocked my number. My mother, the only person who stood by me through everything, passed away last year disappointed in the man I became. My father, who taught me everything about cooking, would be ashamed if he were alive to see this. So yes, let's talk about Mary. Let's talk about what I did to her, and let's talk about how karma, that force I never believed in, came back to destroy me completely. 8 years ago, I was at the top of my game. I owned LeBlanc, the most prestigious restaurant in the city. We had a Michelin star. We were booked solid 6 months in advance. Food critics wrote glowing reviews that used words like transcendent and revolutionary. Politicians held power dinners at my tables. Celebrities demanded the private dining room. Marriage proposals happened in my restaurant almost weekly. I was Christopher Morrison, culinary genius, and I believed I was untouchable. I believed I was special. I believed the rules that applied to ordinary people didn't apply to me. The restaurant industry, particularly at the high end, operates on a culture of intensity. Long hours, high pressure, perfectionist standards, temperamental chefs screaming at their staff. It's almost romanticized, isn't it? The brilliant but difficult artist, the demanding genius who pushes everyone around him to be better. I bought into that mythology completely. I convinced myself that my anger was passion, that my cruelty was high standards, that my abusive behavior was somehow necessary for excellence. I was wrong about all of it, but I didn't know that yet. Or maybe I did know somewhere deep down, but I chose to ignore it because the alternative meant admitting I was just a bully with a knife. Mary came into my life through a staffing agency. She was 43 years old, recently immigrated from Eastern Europe, spoke heavily accented English, and had 17 years of professional cooking experience in her home country. On paper, she was overqualified to be a line cook in anyone's kitchen. She should have been running her own kitchen somewhere, or at minimum working as a sous chef. But she was desperate. Her husband had died in an accident 2 years before, and she'd brought her 3 children to America looking for a better life, looking for opportunity, looking for the American dream we're all supposed to believe in. I remember the interview clearly, though I wish I didn't. She sat across from my desk in my small office that overlooked the kitchen, wearing a modest dress that had clearly been ironed with meticulous care, her hands folded in her lap, her resume printed on slightly wrinkled paper. She was nervous. Her English was functional but limited. She stumbled over words, apologized for her accent, explained her situation with a mixture of hope and desperation that should have touched my heart. She needed this job. She needed it badly. And I could see that desperation in her eyes, could see how vulnerable she was, could see that she would accept almost any conditions just to have a chance. And I exploited that. Let's be absolutely clear about this. I hired Mary knowing I could pay her far less than she was worth, knowing she wouldn't complain about conditions or hours, knowing her immigration status and economic desperation made her powerless to push back against anything I did. I hired her specifically because she was vulnerable, because I could take advantage of her, because she needed me more than I needed her. That's the truth. That's the ugly, shameful truth that I have to live with now. I paid her $14 an hour when someone with her experience should have been making at least 25. I scheduled her for 50 to 60-hour weeks, but classified her as part-time to avoid benefits. I made her sign documents she didn't fully understand because her English wasn't strong enough to parse legal language. I was a predator, plain and simple, taking advantage of someone who had no power to fight back. For the first 4 months, Mary was the perfect employee from my selfish perspective. She showed up 30 minutes before her shift started every single day. She stayed late without being asked, often working 12 or 13-hour shifts without overtime pay because she was too afraid to ask for it. She worked harder than anyone else in my kitchen, moved faster, made fewer mistakes. She never called in sick, never complained, never pushed back when I assigned her the worst stations or the most difficult prep work. She kept her head down, did her job with quiet competence, and seemed grateful just to be there. But then, I started noticing other things. Things that bothered me in ways I couldn't quite articulate at the time, though looking back now I understand exactly what was happening. I was threatened by her. The other cooks started going to Mary with questions instead of coming to me or to my sous chef James. When someone made a mistake, Mary would quietly help them fix it before it became a problem, before I even noticed. She started suggesting small modifications to dishes, tiny improvements that made the food better without overstepping her authority or making a big deal about it. The kitchen ran more smoothly when she was there. People liked her. They respected her. And that bothered me deeply. My restaurant was supposed to be my kingdom, and I was supposed to be the undisputed ruler. Everyone was supposed to defer to me, to fear me a little bit, to see me as the sole source of culinary wisdom and authority. But here was this immigrant line cook, this woman who barely spoke English, who I was paying poverty wages, and she was becoming indispensable. People were starting to rely on her judgment, starting to see her as a leader. And I couldn't tolerate that. So I started undermining her. At first, it was subtle. Professional critique that went just a little too far. Pointing out tiny flaws that didn't really matter. Making her redo dishes that were perfectly fine. I'd schedule her for the worst shifts, the ones that started at 5 in the morning or ended at 2 in the morning, making it nearly impossible for her to maintain any kind of normal life with her children. I'd give her the most physically demanding stations, the ones that left you exhausted and aching after a full shift. I'd criticize her English when she spoke up during staff meetings, making her self-conscious about communicating even when she had something valuable to contribute. I remember one staff meeting where Mary suggested a modification to our fish special, a small change in the sauce that would complement the seasonal vegetables better. It was a good idea. An excellent idea actually, and several other cooks nodded in agreement. But I shut her down immediately, mocking her accent as she explained her reasoning, making her repeat herself multiple times as if I couldn't understand her, then dismissing the suggestion entirely. The humiliation on her face should have made me feel terrible, but instead it gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. I'd put her back in her place. But she never broke. That was the thing that made me even angrier. Mary just absorbed everything I threw at her. She'd nod when I criticized her, say, "Yes, chef," in that accented voice, and work even harder. She never complained to the other staff. She never talked back. She never showed weakness. Her quiet dignity in the face of my abuse made me want to break her even more. I wanted a reaction. I wanted her to snap, to yell back, to give me a clear justification for firing her. But she never did. My behavior escalated over the next year. I went from professional critique to personal attacks. I'd make comments about her accent in front of customers when she had to communicate with the front-of-house staff. I'd joke about her clothes, which were always clean but clearly not expensive, making remarks about how she looked like she was going to clean houses rather than work in a fine dining establishment. I'd assign her tasks that were deliberately demeaning, like having her clean the grease trap or scrub floors, jobs that were supposed to be rotated among junior staff, but that I made her do regularly. I'd schedule her for major holidays, Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve, and then give everyone else those days off. I'd dock her pay for imaginary infractions, $20 here, $50 there, small amounts that she couldn't afford to lose but that she was too afraid to challenge. Once, I made her throw away an entire day's worth of prep work, perfectly good mirepoix that she'd spent 3 hours preparing, because I claimed the dice weren't uniform enough. They were fine. Everyone in the kitchen could see they were fine. But I made her dump all of it in the garbage and start over, staying 2 hours past her shift to redo work that didn't need redoing. I didn't pay her for those extra hours. Another time, I scheduled her to work a double shift, 16 hours straight, and then wrote her up for looking tired during dinner service. I put it in her employee file, a formal disciplinary action for being exhausted after working 16 hours with only a 20-minute break. And still she stayed. Still, she worked hard. Still, she showed up every day with that quiet determination. I realize now that she was stronger than I ever was, that her resilience in the face of my cruelty took more courage than anything I'd ever done in my life. She had 3 children depending on her. She had rent to pay, mouths to feed, dreams to pursue. She couldn't afford to quit, couldn't afford to fight back, couldn't afford to do anything except endure. And I knew that. I exploited that vulnerability deliberately and systematically. The other staff noticed, of course they did. My sous chef James pulled me aside multiple times, suggesting carefully that maybe I was being too hard on Mary. A couple of the other cooks started standing up for her in small ways, making sure she got proper breaks, helping her with her station when she fell behind because I'd overloaded her. But I was the owner. I was the head chef. No one could really stop me. And the restaurant industry is notorious for tolerating abusive behavior from people in power. So even the staff members, who were uncomfortable with how I treated Mary, didn't feel like they could do anything about it. One cook, a young woman named Sophia, actually confronted me directly. She said what I was doing to Mary was wrong, that it was cruel and unjustified. I fired her on the spot. Told her to get out of my kitchen immediately. The message to everyone else was clear. If you defend Mary, you'll suffer the same fate. After that, people stopped speaking up. They'd look uncomfortable when I went after Mary, but they stayed silent. And their silence enabled me to get worse. My personal life was falling apart too, though I didn't connect it to my behavior at work. My wife, Jennifer, grew more distant. We fought constantly. She'd ask me why I was so angry all the time, why I came home from work in a rage, why I drank so much. I'd tell her she didn't understand the pressure I was under, the stress of maintaining a Michelin star, the weight of expectations. But the truth was that I was becoming a worse person every day, and she could see it even if I couldn't. My children, Emma and Lucas, were teenagers then. They started avoiding me. They'd make excuses not to have dinner with me. They'd stay in their rooms when I was home. Emma told me once, during an argument, that I scared her. That she never knew which version of me she'd get, the father who was sometimes kind and funny, or the father who exploded at tiny mistakes. I told her she was being dramatic, that I was just stressed from work. I didn't see that I was bringing my abusive behavior home, that the cruelty I practiced in my kitchen was seeping into every other relationship in my life. I remember one incident that should have been a wake-up call, but that I dismissed at the time. Lucas, who was 15, made dinner for the family one night while Jennifer was working late. He was trying to do something nice, trying to connect with me through cooking since that was supposedly my passion. He made pasta with marinara sauce, nothing fancy but competent for a teenager with limited experience. I came home, looked at what he'd made, and tore it apart. The pasta was overcooked. The sauce was too acidic. The presentation was sloppy. I went on, criticizing every aspect of his effort, speaking to my own son the way I spoke to my staff in the kitchen. Lucas's face crumpled. He'd been so proud of what he'd made, so excited to share it with me. And I destroyed that in minutes. Jennifer came home to find Lucas crying in his room and me eating takeout because I'd declared his dinner inedible. She looked at me with such disappointment, such disgust, and said, "What happened to you, Christopher? When did you become this person?" I told her she was overreacting, that I was just trying to teach Lucas proper technique. But I knew, somewhere deep inside, that what I'd done was unforgivable. I just couldn't admit it. The night everything changed, the night that would eventually lead to my complete destruction, started like many other nightmare shifts. It was a Saturday in December, one of our busiest nights of the year. We had 400 covers booked, 3 large parties, 2 wedding proposals that I knew about, and a food critic from a major publication who had made a reservation under a fake name, but whom my hostess had recognized. The kitchen was operating at maximum capacity. Every station was full. The printer was spitting out orders constantly. The heat, the noise, the pressure, everything was at peak intensity. Mary was working the sauce station that night, one of the most demanding positions in the kitchen. Every entree that went out passed through her hands. She had to manage timing, temperature, plating, all while keeping track of dozens of orders at different stages of completion. And she was handling it beautifully. Every plate that left her station was perfect. Her timing was flawless. She was in the zone, that flow state that every cook dreams of reaching. Even I could see she was performing at an incredibly high level. But I was in a terrible mood. Jennifer and I had a massive fight that morning. She'd told me she was thinking about leaving, that she couldn't live with my anger anymore, that the children were suffering. My accountant had sent me financial reports showing that despite our reputation, the restaurant was barely profitable. The margins in fine dining are razor thin, and I'd been making some poor business decisions. I'd been comping too many meals for VIPs, spending too much on rare ingredients to impress critics, paying too much for premium beef and seafood that we couldn't price high enough to make worthwhile. The numbers were bad, getting worse, and I didn't know how to fix them without compromising the standards that had earned us our reputation. I'd had too much wine at lunch with a vendor, trying to negotiate better prices and lower minimum orders. My head was pounding. My hands were shaking slightly. I was looking for someone to take my anxiety and anger out on, and Mary was there, performing flawlessly, which somehow made me even angrier. I don't even remember what started it. Maybe a sauce was 20 seconds late. Maybe I didn't like the way she plated something, even though it was exactly how I trained everyone to plate it. Maybe I was just in such a dark place that I needed to hurt someone, and she was the most vulnerable target available. But suddenly I was screaming at her, in the middle of the dinner rush, with my entire kitchen staff watching and listening. I called her incompetent. I called her useless. I told her she was the worst cook I'd ever had the misfortune of hiring. I said she'd never amount to anything in this industry, that she should go back to wherever she came from, that she was wasting everyone's time. I called her stupid, slow, clumsy. I said she was dragging down the entire kitchen, that we'd be better off without her. I went on and on, my voice getting louder, my words getting crueler, feeding off my own rage and the shocked silence of everyone around me. It felt good in the moment, which is the most shameful part. Tearing her down, humiliating her, making her small, made me feel powerful and in control. Mary stood there at her station, wooden spoon still in her hand, and took it all. Her face went pale. Her hands were shaking slightly. But she didn't cry. She didn't yell back. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there while I destroyed her dignity in front of 20 other people who worked for me. I saw tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not give me the satisfaction of seeing her break. And then I saw it. Someone had left a garbage bag near her station during prep, intending to take it out after the rush. It was full of the day's kitchen waste, vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, fish bones, spoiled ingredients, grease-soaked paper towels, the disgusting detritus of a busy kitchen. In my rage-fueled state, beyond rational thought, I grabbed that garbage bag and I threw it at her feet with all my strength. The bag split open on impact. Garbage exploded everywhere. It splattered on Mary's shoes, on her chef's pants, on her station, on the floor around her. Coffee grounds and rotting vegetables, and fish bones scattered across the tile. Grease soaked into her pants. The smell was terrible. The visual was shocking. And Mary just stood there, looking down at the garbage at her feet, her face expressionless now, gone completely blank. "Clean it up," I said, my voice cold now, the rage suddenly replaced by something worse, something calculating and cruel. "Since you're useless as a cook, maybe you can manage to be a janitor. Maybe that's more your speed. Get on your knees and clean up this mess." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Even during the chaos of a busy service, even with orders backing up and tickets piling up, everyone had stopped working. They were all staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to horror to disgust. My sous chef James looked like he might be sick. One of the junior cooks was actually crying. The dishwasher, a quiet man who barely spoke, was shaking his head slowly. But I was too far gone to care, too committed to my cruelty to back down. Mary looked at the garbage. She looked at me. And then, very slowly and deliberately, she untied her apron, folded it with careful precision, and placed it neatly on her station. She took off her chef's coat and folded that too. She gathered her personal knife roll from under her station. She looked at me one more time, and the expression in her eyes was something I'll never forget. Not anger. Not hurt. Just a kind of profound disappointment. A recognition that I was exactly as small as my actions suggested. And then she walked out of my kitchen, through the dining room, in front of all those customers in their expensive clothes, covered in garbage and carrying herself with more dignity than I'd ever possessed in my entire life. She held her head high. She walked slowly, deliberately, not running or crying or showing any sign of the humiliation I'd tried to inflict. She was magnificent in that moment, though I was too blind to see it. She didn't clean up the mess. She didn't say a single word. She just left, walking out during the busiest service of the week, and somehow that silence was more damning than anything she could have said. I finished that service short-staffed and furious. I told the remaining kitchen staff that Mary had quit, that she'd abandoned us during a critical time, that she'd proven she didn't have what it takes to work in a serious kitchen. I made her the villain in my version of the story. I jumped on her station and finished the tickets myself, making sure everyone saw how hard I had to work to cover for her. Abandonment. I played the martyr, the dedicated chef forced to do extra work because of an unreliable employee. But the atmosphere in the kitchen had changed permanently. People were shaken by what they'd witnessed. The usual banter was gone. No one made eye contact with me. They did their work mechanically, efficiently, but without any of the passion or camaraderie that makes a kitchen more than just a workplace. I'd broken something essential, and I was too arrogant to realize it. Over the next few days, I told anyone who would listen that Mary had proven me right, that she'd been useless after all, that I was well rid of her. I embellished the story, claiming she'd made critical mistakes during service, that she'd endangered the restaurant's reputation, that her walking out was just the final proof of her incompetence. I convinced myself of this narrative, made myself believe it, because the alternative was facing what I'd actually done. She came in one final time to collect her last paycheck. It was a Tuesday afternoon during prep time. I saw her walk in through the back door, and for a moment our eyes met. I thought about apologizing, about explaining, about somehow making it right. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away and went back to my office, letting my manager handle the exchange. Mary took her money without saying a word and left. I never saw her in person again. I hired a replacement cook within a week, a young culinary school graduate who was grateful for the opportunity and too inexperienced to recognize the toxic environment. I tried to move on with my life, convinced that the incident was behind me, that no one outside my kitchen would ever know what happened, that I had successfully buried the story. But things started changing at LeBlanc, changes I was too arrogant to recognize at first. The kitchen atmosphere became toxic in ways that went beyond normal high-pressure intensity. The staff who'd witnessed what I did to Mary looked at me differently. The easy camaraderie, the sense of being a team working toward excellence, it evaporated. People did their jobs, but without enthusiasm, without the passion that makes a great kitchen into something special. They were afraid of me, yes, but they also lost respect for me, and in a kitchen, respect is everything. James, my loyal sous chef who'd worked with me for 6 years, gave notice 2 months later. He didn't give a real reason, just said he'd found another opportunity. But I saw the way he looked at me when he gave notice, the disappointment and disgust he tried to hide. He'd lost faith in me that night with Mary, and he couldn't work for me anymore. Before he left, he said something I've never forgotten. "You used to be a great chef, Christopher. Now you're just a great cook. There's a difference." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but I do now. Being a chef means leading people, inspiring them, bringing out their best. I'd stopped doing that a long time ago. 3 other experienced cooks left over the next few months. Replacing them became increasingly difficult. Word spreads in the restaurant industry, and apparently word was spreading that LeBlanc was a terrible place to work, that the chef owner was abusive and unstable, that the turnover was constant. The quality of applicants declined. I was getting recent culinary school graduates with minimal experience, or people who'd been fired from other establishments, or cooks so desperate for work that they'd accept the low wages and terrible conditions. The overall skill level in my kitchen dropped noticeably. My Michelin star was up for review that year. We lost it. The inspector's report mentioned inconsistency in execution, and a sense that the kitchen lacked cohesion and soul. Individual dishes were still technically proficient, but something essential was missing. The magic, the spark, the indefinable quality that makes great food transcendent. I told myself it was politics, that the Michelin system was arbitrary and unfair, that the inspector had it out for me. But deep down, I knew the truth. My kitchen had lost something essential when Mary left, when I revealed exactly what kind of person I was. We were technically competent, but spiritually empty, and you can't fake passion and heart. The loss of the Michelin star was devastating to my ego and my business. Reservations dropped 30% almost immediately. The prestige guests, the celebrities and politicians and food tourists, they stopped coming. We went from being the restaurant people bragged about getting into, to just another expensive place to eat. Reviews became more critical, noting the same thing the Michelin inspector had: technically good food, but something missing. My marriage finally ended a year after I fired Mary. Jennifer filed for divorce and asked for full custody of Emma and Lucas. She told the judge, in a closed hearing, about my drinking, my rages, my increasingly unstable behavior. She talked about the incident with Lucas and the dinner, about how I'd made Emma cry over a B+ on a test, about how I'd thrown a remote control at the wall during an argument and made a hole that we'd never repaired. She painted a picture of a man spiraling out of control, unable to manage his anger, potentially dangerous. My children wrote letters to the court saying they wanted to live with their mother, that they didn't feel safe with me, that they loved me but didn't like being around me. Emma wrote that she'd been having anxiety attacks for 2 years, triggered by the sound of my car pulling into the driveway, because she never knew what mood I'd be in. Lucas wrote that he'd given up trying to have a relationship with me because nothing he did was ever good enough. I lost them. I lost my family because I couldn't control my worst impulses, because I'd let the cruelty I practiced at work infect every other part of my life, because I'd become the kind of man who made his own children afraid of him. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, gave up on fighting for custody because my own lawyer told me I'd lose anyway, and walked out into a world that suddenly felt much emptier. The restaurant started declining too. Without the Michelin star, we lost more than just prestige. We lost our competitive edge. Other restaurants in the city were innovating, creating exciting new concepts, earning their own stars and accolades. LeBlanc started feeling dated, stuck in an era of formal fine dining that was falling out of favor. But I was too proud to adapt, too convinced of my own genius to change. Reservations dropped further. I started cutting corners to try to maintain profitability. Using cheaper ingredients, buying from less reputable suppliers, reducing portion sizes slightly, anything to improve the margins. But cutting corners in fine dining is death. You can't maintain a reputation for excellence when you're serving inferior products. Food bloggers and critics started noticing. Reviews mentioned that LeBlanc wasn't what it used to be, that the quality had declined, that it no longer justified the high prices. I went through sous chefs like water. No one lasted more than a few months. They'd come in excited to work at LeBlanc, to learn from the famous Christopher Morrison, and then they'd discover what I was really like and they'd leave. Some quit outright. Others I fired for perceived infractions and disloyalty. I went through dozens of line cooks too. The revolving door of staff meant constant training, constant mistakes, constant inconsistency. The food got worse. The service got worse. Everything got worse. And I kept drinking. More than before. I'd start with wine at lunch, continue through dinner service, and finish with whiskey alone in my apartment at night. I told myself I was self-medicating the stress, managing the anxiety of watching my dream crumble. But I was just numbing myself, trying not to feel the consequences of my own actions. There were nights I don't remember, entire evenings lost to alcohol-induced blackouts. I'd wake up on my couch, still in my chef's whites, with no memory of how I got home. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of slow decline, of gradual failure, of watching everything I'd built fall apart. LeBlanc was still open, still serving customers, but it was a ghost of what it had been. We were no longer prestigious. We were just another expensive restaurant in a city full of them, distinguished only by our fading reputation and my deteriorating mental state. My personal life had completely fallen apart. I lived alone in a nice apartment that felt like a tomb. I rarely saw my children, and when I did, the visits were awkward and strained. Emma had started college and barely spoke to me. Lucas was finishing high school and had made it clear he wanted minimal contact. My reputation in the industry went from celebrated to forgotten. People stopped mentioning my name in articles about the local food scene. Young chefs who'd once wanted to stage at LeBlanc now went to other restaurants. I was becoming irrelevant, a has-been, yesterday's news. And I responded by becoming more bitter, more angry, more cruel to the few staff members who remained. Then, 3 years ago, on a random Tuesday night, drunk and alone and scrolling through television channels, I saw her, Mary, on my screen. She was a contestant on MasterChef America, one of those cooking competition shows where unknown chefs compete for prizes and recognition. And she wasn't just a contestant. She was excelling. She was impressing the judges with dishes that looked restaurant quality. She was confidently explaining her techniques in perfect English, smiling with genuine joy, looking transformed from the woman I'd known. I sat up, suddenly sober with shock. It was definitely her. Older, her hair graying now, wearing glasses she hadn't worn before, but unmistakably the woman I'd humiliated and thrown garbage at. The woman I'd told would never amount to anything. And here she was, on national television, showcasing incredible skill and creativity, competing against professional chefs and winning. I watched the whole episode in horrified fascination. Mary talked about immigrating to America, about losing her husband, about working multiple jobs while attending culinary school at night. She talked about her 3 children, about wanting to make them proud, about never giving up on her dream despite facing discrimination and hardship. She was articulate, passionate, talented. Everything I had told her she wasn't. When asked why she decided to compete on the show, she said she wanted to prove to herself and her children that anything is possible with hard work and determination. The judges loved her. The other contestants respected her. America was falling in love with her story. She didn't mention me in that episode. But I knew I was part of her story. I was one of those hardships she'd overcome, one of those obstacles she defeated. And watching her succeed, watching her smile, watching the judges praise her food and her spirit, I felt something twist in my gut. Fear, mostly. Fear that she might tell the world what I'd done. Fear that my worst moment might be exposed. But also something else. Something that might have been shame, though I tried not to acknowledge it. Because seeing her there, seeing what she'd become, made me realize just how wrong I'd been about her. And if I was wrong about her, what did that say about my judgment? About my leadership? About me? Mary continued winning. Week after week, she advanced through the competition. Each episode showed her growing more confident, more skilled, more beloved by viewers and judges. Social media fell in love with her. She became the fan favorite, the underdog everyone rooted for. Her backstory resonated with people: immigrant, widow, single mother, working-class woman fighting for her dream against all odds. She represented something people wanted to believe in, proof that hard work and talent could overcome any obstacle. I watched every episode, unable to stop myself. Part of me hoped she'd be eliminated, that she'd fail, that I'd be vindicated somehow in my assessment of her. But a larger part of me, a part one didn't want to examine too closely, was amazed by her talent. She was genuinely brilliant. Her food was creative and beautiful and technically perfect. She had that rare combination of skill and artistry that makes for truly great cooking. And I tried to crush that. I tried to convince her she was worthless when she was actually extraordinary. The other contestants talked about how much they'd learned from Mary, how she'd helped them improve their techniques, how generous she was with her knowledge. The judges commented on her leadership qualities, how she naturally took charge during team challenges, how she brought out the best in people. Everything I should have been as a chef but never was. Everything I had seen in her years ago and felt threatened by instead of celebrating. The competition continued for months. Mary made it to the semifinals by creating a 3-course meal that had the judges literally applauding. She made it to the finals with a dessert that one judge called the best thing he'd eaten all season. The entire country seemed to be watching, seemed to be invested in her story. and I became more and more terrified of what would happen when she won. Because I could tell she was going to win. She was too talented, too compelling, too perfectly positioned as the heartwarming underdog for the show to allow any other outcome. I started having nightmares about it. Dreams where Mary stood on that stage and pointed at me in the audience, telling everyone what I'd done. Dreams where I watched her win and felt my entire world collapse. I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, and immediately check social media to see if she'd said anything about me. But there was nothing. Just Mary continuing her journey, continuing to inspire people, continuing to succeed. The finale aired on a Sunday night in March. I closed the restaurant that night, something I'd never done on a Sunday before, one of our busiest days. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't focus on anything except what was about to happen. I watched it alone in my apartment above the restaurant, which was closed because I could barely afford to stay open 6 days a week anymore. I had a bottle of whiskey next to me, which I started drinking before the show even began. Mary was competing against 2 other exceptional chefs for the grand prize, $300,000, and a restaurant development deal with investors lined up, and a guaranteed location in a major market. The challenges were brutal. The pressure was immense. But Mary was calm, focused, brilliant. She moved through the challenges with a grace and confidence I'd never seen in her when she worked for me. Or maybe it had always been there, and I'd been too blind to see it. Her appetizer made the judges close their eyes and smile with pure pleasure. Her main course prompted spontaneous applause from everyone in the studio. And her dessert, a recreation of her grandmother's recipe from her home country but elevated with everything she'd learned, made one of the celebrity judges actually cry. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was the kind of cooking that transcends technique and becomes art, becomes emotion, becomes a story told through flavor and texture and presentation. She won unanimously. The judges didn't even need to deliberate. They all agreed immediately that Mary was the winner, that her talent and story and heart had won them over completely. Confetti fell from the ceiling. The other contestants, who'd competed against her but grown to love her, rushed to hug her. The host handed her the giant check and the contract and declared her the winner of MasterChef America Season 12. She collapsed in tears of joy while her 3 children, now young adults, rushed onto the stage to embrace her. Her daughters were crying. Her son was crying. Everyone was crying. It was a perfect television moment, a fairy tale ending, the triumph of good over adversity. And then came the winner's interview. The segment where the champion tells their story, thanks their supporters, talks about their journey. The host, a famous chef himself with multiple Michelin stars, sat down with Mary in front of the cameras and the studio audience and the millions watching at home, and asked her about the obstacles she'd overcome to reach this moment. Mary smiled. And that smile should have warned me. It was the smile of someone who's been waiting years for this exact opportunity, who's been planning what to say, who knows exactly how to use this platform. "I want to tell you about a night 6 years ago," she began, and my heart stopped. My hands started shaking so badly I spilled whiskey on my lap. "I was working at an upscale restaurant here in the city. I was a line cook, working for a chef who owned the place. I won't name him, though some people might figure it out." Please don't, I thought desperately. Please, Mary, don't do this. But even as I thought it, I knew I deserved whatever was coming. I knew I'd earned this moment. "It was a busy service, a Saturday night," Mary continued, her voice steady and clear and strong. "I was working as hard as I could, like I always did. I needed that job. My children needed me to keep that job. But the chef, the owner, he was having a bad day. And he decided to take it out on me." The studio audience was already silent, leaning forward, sensing something important was about to be revealed. "He screamed at me in front of the entire kitchen staff. He called me useless, incompetent, worthless. He said I'd never amount to anything in this industry. He told me I should go back to my country. And then—" She paused, letting the tension build, letting the audience wait. She was good at this, I realized. She understood how to tell a story, how to make people feel what she felt. "And then he threw a bag of garbage at my feet. He made it split open so trash would spill all over me, all over my clothes and shoes. Coffee grounds, fish bones, rotting vegetables, everything. And he told me that since I was useless as a cook, maybe I could manage to be a janitor. He told me to get on my knees and clean it up." The studio audience gasped. The host's face showed shock and disgust and anger. The camera was tight on Mary's face, and she wasn't crying. She was calm, composed, powerful. She had complete control of this moment. "I stood there, covered in garbage, in front of all those people, and I had a choice to make," Mary said. "I could do what he said. I could get on my knees and clean up that trash and accept that this was what I deserved. Or I could walk away. I could choose dignity over desperation. So I took off my apron, and I walked out of that kitchen, and I promised myself something." The audience was completely silent now. Everyone watching was silent, including me, though I was also crying, tears running down my face that I didn't bother to wipe away. "I promised myself that I would become so good at cooking, so successful, so undeniable, that everyone who saw me would know he was wrong. That he was the one who was worthless, not me. That his cruelty said everything about him and nothing about me." She paused again, and now she looked directly into the camera, as if she knew I was watching, as if she was speaking directly to me. "I want to thank that chef," Mary said, and smiled wider. "Because that night, standing there humiliated, I found my strength. Every night at culinary school, when I was exhausted from working 2 jobs and taking care of my children, when I wanted to give up because it was too hard, I remembered the garbage bag. I remembered his face when he threw it at me. And I worked harder. Every time I faced discrimination or someone told me I was too old, too foreign, too poor, too female to succeed, I remembered being told I was useless. And I'd prove them wrong." The audience started applauding, but Mary raised her hand to stop them. She wasn't done. "To that chef, wherever you are, I know you're watching this. You're probably in your restaurant right now, or maybe at home, and you're seeing me win. You're seeing me succeed. You're seeing me receive $300,000 and a restaurant deal and the respect of everyone in this industry. And I want you to know something." My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the whiskey glass anymore. I set it down and waited for her to destroy me. "Thank you," Mary said, and her voice was filled with sincerity. "Thank you for showing me exactly the kind of person I never wanted to become. Thank you for teaching me that cruelty reveals more about the cruel person than their victim. Thank you for underestimating me so completely, for treating me so badly, for trying so hard to break me. Because all of that just made me stronger. All of that just made me more determined. All of that just made this moment sweeter." She paused one more time, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet but everyone could hear it clearly. "I won. Despite everything you did to me, despite everything you took from me, despite everything you tried to make me believe about myself, I won. And you have to live with knowing that you were wrong about everything. That the woman you threw garbage at is standing here with this trophy, and this money, and this contract. That the woman you called useless is being celebrated on national television by millions of people. That the woman you tried to destroy is more successful than you'll ever be again." The audience erupted. They stood up, applauding, cheering, some of them crying. The host hugged Mary. The other contestants rushed onto the stage to celebrate with her. Her children embraced her again. It was a perfect moment of triumph and vindication and justice. And I sat there in my dark apartment, feeling my entire world crumble in real time. She never said my name. She was too smart for that, too careful, too aware of potential legal issues. But she didn't need to. Within an hour, social media had figured it out. Former employees posted about working at LeBlanc, connecting the dots. Someone shared that Mary's LinkedIn had listed LeBlanc as a previous employer during the relevant time frame. People started putting timelines together, comparing dates, confirming details. My phone started ringing. Text messages poured in. Emails flooded my inbox. Former staff reaching out with a mixture of concern and accusation. Journalists requesting comment. Food bloggers asking for interviews. And underneath all of it, a growing wave of anger directed at me from people I'd never met, but who now knew exactly what I'd done. By morning, my name was everywhere. Christopher Morrison, the chef who threw garbage at an immigrant cook who went on to win MasterChef America. The story was irresistible to the media. The villain revealed. The victim vindicated. Perfect narrative symmetry. Every news outlet picked it up. Every food blog dissected it. Every social media platform debated it. And overwhelmingly, people took Mary's side. Of course they did. How could anyone not? But it got worse. Because once people started digging into my past, once the spotlight was on me, other stories emerged. Former employees came forward with their own tales of my abuse. The cook I'd made cry almost daily until she quit. The prep cook I'd fired for asking about legally mandated overtime pay. The dishwasher I'd berated for not speaking English well enough, even though he wasn't in a customer-facing position. The female sous chef I'd made inappropriate comments to until she felt forced to leave. Story after story, abuse after abuse, pattern after pattern. People found old blog posts and deleted social media posts from former employees hinting at a toxic work environment at LeBlanc. Someone uncovered a complaint filed with the labor board that had been settled quietly years ago. Another person found health inspection reports noting high staff turnover and morale issues. The evidence mounted that I wasn't just the guy who'd thrown garbage at Mary. I was a serial abuser, a predator boss, the embodiment of everything toxic about kitchen culture and the restaurant industry. And I had no defense. Because it was all true. Every story, every accusation, every damning detail. I'd done all of it. I'd been exactly the monster they were painting me as. Maybe worse, because at least a monster doesn't understand what it's doing is wrong. I knew. I'd always known. I just didn't care because I could get away with it. My reservations disappeared overnight. Customers canceled in droves, sometimes leaving notes explaining that they couldn't in good conscience support an establishment run by someone like me. The calls came in constantly, our answering service overwhelmed with cancellations. Within 3 days, we had no reservations for the next month. None. For a restaurant that once required 6 months advance booking, we were completely empty. My remaining staff quit en masse. Everyone except the dishwasher, who told me he was only staying because he needed any job he could get but that he'd be looking for something else. I was alone in my kitchen, the expensive equipment surrounding me like monuments to a fallen empire. Vendors started demanding immediate payment, worried that I'd go under and they'd be left with unpaid invoices. Some refused to deliver to me at all, not wanting their businesses associated with mine. My suppliers abandoned me one by one. My wine distributor, my fish supplier, my produce vendor, all of them cutting ties. My landlord saw an opportunity to get rid of a struggling tenant. Building inspectors suddenly found code violations that had somehow been overlooked for years. Fire marshal visited and discovered problems. Health department showed up unannounced and found infractions. Some of them were legitimate, things that had fallen into disrepair as I had lost focus and motivation. Others felt manufactured, as if everyone was looking for a reason to shut me down. protesters showed up outside Le Blanc. Not many at first, maybe a dozen people with handmade signs calling me a bully and an abuser and demanding the restaurant close. But they got media coverage, which brought more protesters, which brought more coverage. Within a week, there were 50 people outside my restaurant every day, chanting, giving interviews, making it impossible for anyone to enter even if they wanted to. I tried to apologize. I hired a crisis PR firm I couldn't afford, spending my last savings on consultants, who coached me on what to say. I wrote a carefully crafted statement for social media, expressing regret and claiming I'd grown as a person and learned from my mistakes. But it rang hollow. How could it not? I hadn't grown. I'd just gotten worse over the years. And everyone could see through the empty corporate speak and the carefully coached apologies. The statement made things worse, actually. People dissected every word, pointing out how I never took real responsibility, how I made it about my growth rather than the harm I'd caused, how I never specifically apologized to Mary or any of my other victims. They were right. Even my apology was selfish and self-serving. I couldn't stop centering myself, couldn't stop trying to manage my image rather than genuinely confronting what I'd done. I tried to reach out to Mary directly. I sent messages through her agent, which went unanswered. I found mutual contacts and asked them to pass along my apology, but they refused, telling me to leave her alone. I even tried to contact her daughters through social media, desperate messages asking them to tell their mother I was sorry, that I understood now, that I wanted to make amends. They blocked me. Mary herself got a restraining order, legally requiring me to stop trying to contact her or her family. Even my attempts to apologize became harassment. Within 2 weeks, Le Blanc was permanently closed. I couldn't pay rent. I couldn't pay utilities. I had no staff and no customers and no way forward. I declared bankruptcy, losing everything. The restaurant, my apartment, my savings, all of it taken by creditors and lawyers, and the cascading financial disaster of my public exposure. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, the only place I could afford on what I had left. I got a job as a prep cook at a chain Italian restaurant, the kind of place I'd once sneered at, the kind of corporate kitchen I'd always said represented everything wrong with American dining. I work under a head chef named Marcus who is 30 years old, young enough to be my son, who knows exactly who I am and who treats me with professional courtesy and nothing more. The other cooks know who I am too. I can see it in their faces. Some look at me with contempt. Some with curiosity, like I'm a zoo animal, a cautionary tale come to life. Some seem almost pleased, enjoying seeing the mighty fallen, taking satisfaction in watching me chop vegetables and portion pasta under the direction of someone half my age. I keep my head down. I do my work. I don't speak unless spoken to. I'm never late. I never complain. I'm trying to be the perfect employee, though I don't know why. Maybe habit. Maybe some last desperate attempt to prove I can do something right. Maybe just because I don't know how else to be. Meanwhile, Mary's star continued rising meteoric and deserved. She opened her restaurant, Maris, 6 months after winning the show. It's in a prime location that the prize helped her secure. The reviews were extraordinary from day one. Critics fell over themselves praising her food, her vision, her leadership. One reviewer wrote that eating at Maris wasn't just a meal, it was an experience of empathy, that you could taste Mary's journey in every dish. Celebrities posted about eating there. Oprah featured it on her favorite things list. The James Beard Foundation invited her to cook at their prestigious dinner series. She appeared on morning shows and podcasts and at culinary conferences. She became a spokesperson for immigrant rights and for kitchen workers' protections. She gave a TED Talk about resilience and transformation that's been viewed 15 million times. She released a cookbook that became an instant bestseller. It's called Rising, A Journey from Humble Beginnings to Culinary Success. And it tells her entire story, including what happened with me, though she still doesn't use my name. Just calls me the chef who told me I'd never amount to anything. The book is full of her recipes, her philosophy, her journey. It's won awards. It's required reading in some culinary schools now. She started a foundation that provides culinary scholarships to immigrant women. She mentors young cooks from disadvantaged backgrounds. She advocates for fair wages and safe working conditions in restaurants. She's using her platform to make the industry better, to lift up the people who are vulnerable the way she once was. She's becoming more than just a successful chef. She's becoming a force for positive change. And I watch it all from a distance, following her career through social media and news articles, like some kind of ghost haunting the edges of her success. I've created a fake Instagram account just to follow her because she blocked my real one. I watch her post pictures of her packed restaurant, her smiling staff, her beautiful dishes. I read articles about her latest achievements, her growing influence, her expanding empire. She's opening a second restaurant next year. She's developing a line of sauces and condiments. She's in talks for a television show of her own. She's everything I told her she'd never be, and so much more than I ever was at my peak. She's successful, yes, but she's also generous and kind and using her success to help others. She's become the kind of chef I should have been, the kind of leader the industry needs. And watching her succeed, watching her shine, I feel a complicated mix of emotions. Shame, certainly. Regret, absolutely. But also something like pride, which I know I have no right to feel. She did this to spite me, not because of me, and I don't get to claim any part of her success. My own children want nothing to do with me. Emma graduated college and got engaged last year. I learned about it from her Instagram. I wasn't invited to the wedding, which happened 3 months ago. I found out by seeing photos people posted, pictures of Jennifer walking Emma down the aisle, Lucas giving a toast as the man of honor. I should have been there. I should have been the one walking my daughter down the aisle. But I forfeited that right years ago through my behavior. Lucas is in medical school now. He's studying to be a psychiatrist, and I wonder sometimes if growing up with me influenced that choice, if watching me spiral made him want to understand and help people with mental health issues. We haven't spoken in 2 years. The last conversation we had, he told me that he'd spent years in therapy dealing with the damage I'd caused, that I'd given him PTSD from the constant walking on eggshells, never knowing when I'd explode. He said he'd forgiven me for his own peace of mind, not for my benefit, and that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. He was done with me. He wished me well, but from a distance. Jennifer remarried 3 years ago, to a high school teacher named David who's everything I wasn't. Patient, gentle, emotionally available, supportive. I see photos of them together sometimes, on Emma's or Lucas's social media. They look happy. David looks at Jennifer the way I should have looked at her, with love and respect and partnership. He's been more of a father to my children in 3 years than I was in 18. I thought about reaching out to Mary again after some time had passed, after the furor died down. But what could I possibly say? What words exist that could bridge that canyon? Sorry I abused you, exploited you, humiliated you, and tried to destroy your spirit. Sorry I treated you as less than human because I could, because you were vulnerable and I had power. Sorry I wasted years of your life and caused you trauma that probably required therapy to overcome. And even if I found the words, even if I crafted the perfect apology, what right do I have to give it? Apologizing would make me feel better, would give me some sense of closure or redemption. But it wouldn't help Mary. She's moved on. She's succeeded. She's thriving. She doesn't need my apology, doesn't need me intruding on her life again, doesn't need any reminder of the worst period of her journey. My apology would be selfish, would be about my need for absolution rather than her healing. So I stay silent. I stay away. It's the least I can do, and possibly the only decent thing I've done regarding Mary in our entire relationship. Sometimes people recognize me. In the grocery store, on the bus, at work. They stare, or whisper, or occasionally confront me directly. One man followed me for 2 blocks, yelling about how I was scum, how people like me were what was wrong with America. A woman spit at my feet in a coffee shop and called me a monster. A teenager recorded me buying groceries and posted it online with the caption, "Look who I found, the chef who threw trash at that lady. Karma got him." Part of me wanted to defend myself, to explain that people don't understand the pressure of running a high-end kitchen, that the industry operates on intensity and high standards, that I was the product of a toxic culture that I inherited and perpetuated. But I don't say anything. Because they're right. I was a monster. I did monstrous things. And no amount of context or explanation changes that. The restaurant industry's toxic culture isn't an excuse for my behavior. It's an explanation, maybe, but not a justification. I made choices. Every day, I chose cruelty over kindness, ego over empathy, power over decency. I wonder if I can change now, if it's too late for redemption. I've stopped drinking, which is something. 347 days sober as of this morning. I attend AA meetings twice a week, sitting in church basements with other people trying to salvage what's left of their lives. I see a therapist weekly, paying what I can afford to talk about my anger and insecurity, and the cascade of choices that destroyed everything I built. My therapist asks me questions I don't want to answer. Where did the cruelty come from? Why did I feel the need to dominate people? What was I really afraid of when I saw Mary's competence and talent? We dig into my childhood, my relationship with my father, who was also a chef and also a bully, the pattern of abuse that was passed down like a family recipe. We talk about toxic masculinity and ego, and the ways I confuse cruelty with strength. It's painful work, this self-examination. Every session leaves me exhausted and raw. But I keep going because what else is there? I've lost everything already. The least I can do is try to understand how I became the person who lost it all. But then, I realize I'm still making it about me. My guilt? My redemption? My growth? That's the same selfish mindset that created all these problems in the first place. Maybe the best thing I can do is just accept my role in this story. Stop trying to rehabilitate my image. Stop centering myself in a narrative that was never really about me. This isn't my story. It never was. This is Mary's story, and I'm just the obstacle she overcame, the villain she defeated on her journey to success. I'm the dark chapter that makes her triumph more meaningful, the suffering that makes her success sweeter. And maybe that's exactly what I deserve to be. Not a protagonist seeking redemption, but a cautionary tale about what happens when you let cruelty and pride rule your life. I yelled useless at Mary. I threw garbage at her feet. I exploited her desperation and tried to break her spirit and destroy her confidence. And 6 years later, she stood on that stage in front of millions of people and showed the world who was really useless. It was me. It was always me. She won everything. The money, the restaurant, the respect, the love of her children, and the admiration of her industry, and the knowledge that she overcame every obstacle put in front of her. She deserved all of it. She earned it through talent and perseverance, and refusing to let me or anyone else define her worth. And I lost everything. Not because of Mary. Not because of bad luck or unfair circumstances or a vindictive public. I lost everything because of my own choices, my own cruelty, my own inability to see other people as fully human and worthy of dignity and respect. I lost everything because I deserved to lose everything. That's the truth I have to live with now. That's the reality I face every morning when I wake up in my tiny apartment and go to my prep cook job and move through a world where everyone knows what I did. And maybe, just maybe, accepting the truth without excuses or justifications or attempts to minimize it is the first real thing I've done in years. Mary won. I lost. And that's exactly how it should be. That's justice. That's karma. That's what happens when cruelty meets resilience, when an oppressor meets someone who refuses to stay oppressed. The ending was always going to be this way. I just didn't know I was living in a story where I was the villain until it was too late to become anything else.